Hi, everyone. I'm Allyson Gavaletz. I'm here today to discuss The Wedding People, our August book club pick. I'm here with Alison Espach, the author of the book, and Lexie Smyth, our category manager for fiction. I personally loved this book, so I'm extra excited to talk about this today. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for you being willing to chat all about this book. And Lexie, go for it.
Great. Thanks, Allison. So Allison, we would love to know where this story started for you.
Thank you to both of you for being here, and I'll hopefully the double Allison situation we can work through this. I started writing this book a long time ago. Many years ago. I'm not sure exactly how many years, but definitely 6 or 7 years ago. I remember actually being in my old apartment, which is how I know it was so long ago. And I was taking a break from my second novel, Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance. I was getting tired of it. I thought it was getting too heavy, just a little too sad for me or something at that particular moment. And so I decided I wanted to write a fun book about this woman, abandoning all of her responsibilities and checking into this luxury hotel and going to a wedding or a wedding taking place at this hotel, but I didn't really know why she was there or what I was just sort of imagining Phoebe as I was writing her, as I was bringing her into the space of the hotel. Mostly, I don't always write that way, but because it was just a break from my big project, I had no aspirations for it. I wasn't outlining. I was just like, let's see who this woman is. And I remember writing the scene of the bride asking, "Why are you here?" to Phoebe. If you're not here for my wedding, then you shouldn't be here, was essentially the bride's response to Phoebe's presence. And I kept typing the question, "Why are you here?" out of the bride's mouth, which was my question. And I went through a few possibilities. She's here to meet her ex-lover, or she's here as an assassin, but delete, like that's not really my style. And I eventually wrote, I'm here to end my life. And I was really surprised by that, but I also knew as soon as I wrote it that that was the story, partially because of how I made the bride respond, which is by saying, no, like this is my wedding week. I'm sorry, you're not doing that, and in that tension right there that developed, I knew was the rest of the book. Of course, I abandoned it for years after writing that scene. I thought, no way am I writing that book, I'm not ready for it. But I, of course, picked it up back later.
Well, we're really glad that you did.
Thank you.
At the beginning of the novel, Phoebe says that the hotel is her happy place. And so I have to ask, do you have a happy place?
Oh, I've never been asked this question before.
Oh, good.
Except by a therapist.
After you wrote a book about killing someone.
I don't know. I mean, I do kind of believe what I wrote in the book, which is if you're happy, everywhere is a happy place. And if you're sad, everywhere is a sad place. I've found that, these sort of certain places where I would maybe expect myself to be happy or at my happiest can often actually trigger a deep sadness, right? If I'm not up for it, or if I'm not able to rise to the occasion of like what this environment is asking for. I mean, that has been like, beautiful vacation spots, or, you're not feeling in harmony with your surroundings. And so something about how wonderful it is actually feels awful. But I will say a happy place. I actually love being in my house, which, every time I walk into my house, I feel a sense of peace come over me. It's not quite happiness, so maybe I'll get there one day, but definitely peace.
That's lovely. It's nice to have a peaceful home.
So, just a note for everyone watching, from here on out, the conversation is going to start to get a little spoilery. So, if you haven't read the book, this will be on YouTube later, and I suggest that you go read the book and then come join us afterwards. Okay, my next question is I would love to know a little bit more about how you write dialogue. One of the first things that drew me into this novel was the conversation between High Bun and Neck Pillow at the start of the book. It's just so real. So I'd love to hear more about your process writing dialogue.
Hmm. I try not to think too much while writing dialogue. It's not a very dignified process, but I just sort of like try to shut down that editor voice in my brain, and just let the conversation roll. I tend to be an overwriter, which can be nice, when you always have a lot of content to edit. I'm always paring things down. I'm always removing things. Of course, that can be frustrating and a lot of work on the other side of things, but that's always for later. I try not to think about that. I just sort of let it go. I just write a conversation. And sometimes that involves imagining a conversation I really wanted to have but didn't, right? Like, what have I wanted to say but have been too afraid to say? A lot of conversations in this book came from that place. Sometimes it involves like fantasizing about what the most fun conversation would be to have, like of the silliest, the most absurd. I really love writing those conversations in books. That's the kind of conversation where Phoebe and Gary are just kind of like teasing each other or playing around with words, or sharing absurd observations they've had and kind of riffing on each other. That's a fun space. And sometimes it just comes from a logical place, right? Like with Phoebe and Layla, I was really focused on them as opposites in the beginning of the book, especially. And so what Phoebe says, Layla is going to say no to, or what Layla asks for, Phoebe is going to say no to. We can call that no dialogue in fiction, where it's just like, no matter what a person says, it just keeps returning to no, 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 or shutting them down or saying absolutely not in some way or another. So just kind of playing with different ways to say no to each other without actually saying no. Right.
Okay, so here is where it's going to start to get a little spoilery, you all. So you have been warned. Um, After Phoebe's decides not to kill herself. She goes to the hot tub and she meets a man who we later find out is Gary. And again, going back to the conversation part of your book, they have one of the most frank conversations. And Phoebe really surprises herself with how honest she is. Um, I would love to hear what you have to say about why sometimes it's easier to be open and vulnerable with someone we don't know rather than with our own people.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that's something I, of course, thought a lot about while writing this book, and have thought about it a lot in my life, because that's sort of what inspired me to write a book about strangers confessing things to each other. I've always felt a real intimacy with strangers. I don't know if they feel it with me. I mean, but I really like being around strangers. I realize that that's not always the case for people. Just having friends, or having relationships, right? And you're going to a party or something, and someone's like, this is going to be terrible. We don't know anyone. And my reaction is always like, this is going to be amazing. We don't know anyone. Like, we can be anyone we want. We can say anything we want. It doesn't matter. The stakes are low because we're probably never going to see these people again. And I think for me that I always craved that kind of space where the stakes felt low. You're meeting someone on an airplane and they ask you how you're doing. Well, it's like, well, why not actually just answer them? We've got 5 hours, 6 hours to California. So why don't I just tell them what's going on in my life? And I find that if one person does that in the conversation, It could be me or it could be them. It kind of inspires the other person to share in the same way that might be unexpectedly intimate. Um, so I just love those moments. And they're not really things that, people talk about that much. These are not like the big people of your life. And yet when I look back on some of the most meaningful conversations I've had some of those conversations with strangers and really explored things about myself in conversation that maybe I would have been too worried about exploring with a close partner or something. And it's not to say that, you're dishonest with the people in your life. It's just that I think there's a worry present. I mean, it's sort of the same reason like you go to therapy. It's like you're paying so you don't have to worry about what the therapist is going to say or think. Like you're not trying to manage your relationship. You're just speaking freely, and that's what you're paying for. A stranger, you don't have to pay. A stranger participates willingly in this conversation with you, and that's what makes it fun and special, and even though it's fleeting.
I love that. There are a couple comments in the chat about how you couple sort of this darkness with humor. How do you write that balance between the heavy subject matter of this book, which includes someone wanting to end their life, with the lightheartedness that you do? Like, even when Phoebe's talking about killing herself, she's kind of hilarious about it. So I'd love to hear how you did that because this book is such a great combination of humor and darkness.
Mm. Well, thank you for saying that. That is something I'm always trying to achieve. So it's really nice to hear when it works for people. I don't, it's funny that I do get asked this question a lot, and it always surprises me for some reason because I, I don't know. My instinct is to just say, well, that's sort of what life is like. Like there's comedy and tragedy in every second, there's it's everywhere. And perhaps I'm sort of tuned into it in a way, like I'm always noticing it or always looking for it. Maybe a little bit more than the average bear or whatever, but and I grew up with sadness sort of at the center of my life. My brother died. If anyone has read my second novel, Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, which I see just sort of got mentioned in the chat, that book was drawn so much from my experience of losing my brother when we were teenagers. So most of my adolescence was kind of darkened by that tragedy, and there was grief at the center of our lives. It very much felt that way to me as a kid. And so I was always trying to look around that or like look through it and try to find some comedy or some reason to laugh, or felt it was my job in some ways to create those moments, look for them if I was feeling funny, like I could be the comedy that night, and it wouldn't have to be my mom or my dad, give them a break. Right. So I just feel like I'm always on the lookout for it, because for me, it is, I hate calling it a coping mechanism because it feels like humor and comedy is so much more than that. But just for a lack of a better description, it is an important coping mechanism for me, that anytime, even in my darkest moments, if something about it seems funny, and maybe that funniness is just the other people around me not caring at all. Like there's just such a stark indifference. Like that is absurd and kind of a little funny to me. And that can make me laugh for just a moment, or, just a moment. That's all I need to just sort of push me out of the funk that I'm in. Um, so I think because that's sort of how I live my life, what I end up writing down or what I end up noticing is very similar. And, just infusing the pages with that as much as I can is really what I want, because I always felt like, having to go through a tragedy, having to be sad is hard enough. I it's hard to endure that without humor. I think in life and in books as well.
I totally agree. I love a dark sense of humor. It's my most favorite. And I definitely want to talk more on the grief aspect of the book. But before we get there, I would love to hear a little bit more about Phoebe and Matt's marriage. If you can talk about their relationship a little bit, and if you knew the path that they were going to take when you started the novel.
I didn't know the path they were going to take when I started the novel. I mean, when I started the novel, I knew they were not together, but I didn't quite know why. And I didn't know whose fault it was. I didn't know how the characters felt about that, except Phoebe, I knew was bummed about it, right? To say the least. I think when I created Phoebe and Matt, I was, especially in their early years, when things were good, when they were falling in love, I was thinking about how Phoebe really relied on that, and as she should, but I think perhaps maybe more than most people. She grew up in a family that was marked by grief. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father was always affected by that, depressive and a little distant, right? And she was an only child as well. So she read all of these books, that kind of promised her this future that she needed to believe in, right? That Bildungsroman, or that marriage plot, right? Where we watch a character who starts off pretty alone, like Jane Eyre, eventually make her way into this new and sort of chosen family. And so I think when she found Matt and fell in love with Matt and married Matt, I think she truly believed like this was her happy ending. I made it, I'm safe, I have this man, and we're going to build a family, and that family is going to be my life raft. And so when that doesn't work for them, or work for her, that's devastating. And for a long time, she couldn't see her way out of that. And so much of the rest of the book was me trying to figure out and understand how she could move beyond that, right? I think it's horrible. I mean, it can feel wonderful to be in love and be so dependent on someone in some ways. And yet at the same time, that can feel horrible to feel like all of your happiness is coming from one thing or one narrow vision of how life is supposed to go. And really pushing her into the space of, okay, there actually are so many avenues available to me and so many sources of happiness that they all matter, equally so.
Yeah. That actually leads perfectly into my next question, which is, do you think part of why Phoebe continues to hang out with the people at the wedding party, is because she has a feeling of a family of her own, because she didn't really have that growing up or with her husband?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's drawn to them for that reason. I think, it probably is true of anyone who feels like they're missing some crucial person or people in their lives, right? If you didn't have a mother, or aren't close with your mother, you might find yourself really attaching strongly to like mothers or strong mothers, or anyone who has a maternal presence, like that can be appealing to you, right? And I think that's certainly true of Phoebe. And so yeah, I think so.
That actually leads me into my next question, which is that, everyone in this book seems a little bit lonely in their own way. Can you talk about loneliness as a theme in the novel?
Yeah, I mean, these characters start off, they probably don't appear to be lonely, at least from Phoebe's perspective, right? I mean, she's walking into that opening, or she's walking in the opening chapter, she's walking into the lobby, and she's seeing them as a group of people, right? Like they all belong to each other. They're all the wedding people. They're all here for the same thing. I'm the outsider, but they belong. And there's a line early on when she says or thinks to herself, I always assume everyone is as lonely as I am, right? And she's trying to almost like talk to herself and say, no, these people are not like, look at them. They're all so happy. And it's a celebratory moment. And that kind of makes her feel even more awful and alone. And, one thing that happens over the course of the book, and like having all of these conversations that she has with everybody, she realizes actually she was wrong, right? That, that some of these people are lonely and some of these people aren't as happy as they initially appeared in that opening lobby scene. It doesn't mean that they're depressed or that they hate their life or, but it's just, Phoebe has a tendency to romanticize things. I mean, she's certainly romanticizing her own future death. She romanticized her marriage. She romanticizes books. She romanticizes the past, right? And I think when she sees people, she thinks they're happier than they are, or she kind of assumes they have this perfect thing going on that she doesn't have access to. And so I think the book was really, her journey was maybe learning to see like it's more complicated than that. And she learns that through all of these conversations.
Speaking of things being more complicated than that, we really want to talk about Layla because she's a bit of an onion. I know when I first read the book, I thought I had her pegged from the first interaction that she and Phoebe had, where she was declaring, this is my wedding week and you can't kill yourself here. But as I read on, I learned a lot more about her, realized that she's a little bit insecure. She's definitely a bit lonely. She can be really funny, even though she doesn't always intend to be. There's just so much more to her there. And the same can be said for Phoebe and many of the other characters in the book. And I'm curious what your process is for writing such complex characters who aren't always what they seem at your first interaction with them.
Mm-hmm. I think I start off with a very dominant impression of the characters, like the one you just described. I'm the kind of writer who starts pretty simply with character. It's like, I just need to know one thing about you, and I'm going to take that and run with it. I used to struggle with, in like creative writing classes, when you get like the character sketch sheet where it's like, fill out everything you know about this character. It's like, does Bob have a tattoo, or like, what is Bob's religion, or when was the last time Bob cried, or, and I remember I would always get bored filling those out, and I would stop halfway through and just think, oh man, I must really not care about character, or like I don't know, something's wrong with me that I don't enjoy this. And it took a long time to realize that I actually just want to know one thing, and that gives me such focus. And that focus is really inspiring to me. So for Layla, it was her reaction to Phoebe's confession, right? The person who says, no, this is my wedding week, is a really particular kind of person. And she is obsessed with her wedding and herself to the point where she can't really see or hear what Phoebe is telling her, right? And doesn't really even have the energy or the will to adapt her response, like out of politeness, right? She's so frantic. She's so, in bride mode. That's all she can think about. And so that impression of Layla carried me through like much of the beginning with her. And the fun part of writing, I think, and it's the fun part of actually getting to know people in life, is that, okay, now we need to move beyond that initial impression. Now I need to actually think about, when is that not true about Layla? And why is Layla that way? Was she born this way? What are some factors in her life that contributed to her being this way? Will she always be this way? Does she want to be this way? So that's the stuff I love, and I think the same is true of Phoebe as well. It's like Phoebe coming in here, this embodiment of despair, and kind of this giving up, and that was a challenge too. It's like, well, when throughout this week is she not going to feel that way? And what is going to create that feeling? And when she's not sad and kind of blocked by despair, what does she dream about and what does she hope for and what does she laugh about, you know? So, I mean, I think honestly, those transitions in fiction are so important to me and so fun to write. I think that's actually the reason that's like why I like novels, and that's why I like to write is creating that on the page.
So throughout the book, there are dispersed just some of these little lines that really knocked me off my feet when I read them. And one of them was, when did Phoebe being good become Phoebe being nothing? I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how the pressure to be good or the idea of being a good person can actually betray us.
Mm-hmm. I forgot I wrote that line. But that is a feeling that I've had before in my life, and which is certainly why it ended up in the book. I think, I always had this sense that being good, and I think many people do, it's not unique to me, but just to speak of myself personally, I've always had this sense that being good would amount to something, like almost like a math equation, right? Like if you put enough goodness, or if you act appropriately or do the right thing or the good thing every single time, like that will pay off in some way. And I'm not here to say that it doesn't, but I think what Phoebe didn't realize, and perhaps what I didn't realize in life, is actually how I was making myself neutral or kind of keeping myself passive, right? I think growing up in the situation that I did, you watch your parents lose a child, and I think that's a weird thing for a child to observe, right? I was always putting myself in my parents' position as a 14-year-old, which is, I don't think, what a lot of 14-year-olds are doing, or it's not what they're known for. Right? I had like parent POV where I could feel their sadness and their disappointment, and I worried about them, and they never asked me to do this. Like, this was just something I took on, myself. And so that, I think I felt like, okay, there's enough going on. I have to be good. I have to be good, and I can't create any disturbance. I can't create any more work for them or stress. And I thought I was doing this good service for them. And I think what I realized was actually at the end of it, someone's like, well, what do you want to have for dinner? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't have those opinions, right? I whatever's easiest for everyone else. So in that opening scene, Phoebe's describing her relationship with Matt, and I, am describing what they like, and it's like whatever's on TV, whatever's on tap. It's whatever's easy. Whatever, we're easygoing, and realizing at some point in my life how that is not how I want to be anymore, and it can take work and it can take practice if you're not used to it. But it's the trajectory of my life going forward is figuring out that, okay, I'm actually being good. It's not what I thought it was.
Another part of the book that really stood out to me was the moment when Gary says to Phoebe after their interaction in the hot tub, "You struck me as a person who was fully alive." It was inspiring, actually. And that's quite the statement after this person was maybe going to kill herself the day before. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Phoebe's internal self versus how all of the people at the wedding end up seeing her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we can get really locked into our own perspectives on ourselves, and we see ourselves a certain way and are so used to seeing ourselves a certain way. And maybe perhaps are so worried that that other people are going to know what we're thinking and we're so worried that other people are going to know what we're feeling and thinking that we assume they do. All right. And I think something that Phoebe learns with these strangers is that they don't know, right? And a lot of what she wants to be known about her, she has to choose to tell them, and she has to choose to share it, and sort of decide how she wants to position herself in conversation, or and yeah, and I think like figuring out that the freedom, I guess, that comes with being around these strangers as well. Like they've never met her. She's carrying an older version of herself into this wedding week, and she sort of assumes maybe that they are going to know that, but quickly realizes, especially with like when Gary saying something like that, she's not expecting him to see her that way at all. Like, oh, I could be a different person here, or maybe not a different person, but I now have access to some part of myself that I wasn't focusing on before, or I didn't think anyone noticed. And certain people bring out certain parts of ourselves, and we like our friends because they bring out or maybe see a sillier side of us than say like our coworkers get to see. And so I kind of just pictured the whole week that way. It's like because these people are strangers, they just don't see Phoebe any particular way. And that is so liberating to her because she does not want to be seen the way she was seen in her old life, right? She took on that vision of herself. She saw herself the way her husband did, or the way Mia saw her, or the way her colleagues sort of saw her and pitied her. She wants to move beyond that. And sometimes you just need a new perspective, like a stranger's perspective, to do that.
I'd love to go back to the grief conversation a little bit. So as you mentioned already, grief is a permeating force in the novel, but yet no one really acknowledges it, even though it's touched almost every single character in the book, until Juice's digital dog dies. And Phoebe finally acknowledges it, which seems what all that Juice wants. Can you talk about the power of acknowledging grief?
Yeah, I mean, I think dancing around grief can be very painful. I think this sort of touches on something I said earlier. When we're sad or when we're grieving, it's already hard enough. But then I think most people who are grieving often take on the job of worrying about how to share that grief, or worry about how to hide that grief. The grief management aspect in terms of social relationships is just another thing on top of the sadness that comes with grieving. And, Phoebe has gone through some things that are not things that we typically talk about at cocktail parties, or in the halls of your office, going through IVF, or thinking about infertility, or you just marital problems, or the disappointments she's had in her life, right? I think she's always been afraid of people finding out about those things, right? Or feeling like she has to do the work to hide that and kind of keep a lid on it, right? And part of her arrival at this hotel is saying, I'm done with that, no more. And so I just kept looking for moments where Phoebe could be the one to say the hard thing or acknowledge the hard thing. And so that's why, when on the boat scene with Juice, when everyone is like, oh no, there's an upset child, a doggy death, that no one knows how to deal with because they're all worried about the awkwardness and the tension. And Phoebe doesn't have to worry about that. She doesn't care, right? So she's just drawn to the authenticity of the moment and the girl's grief, and can identify with it, and wants her to know that she's not alone in that moment, which is why she suggests the funeral. It's why she suggests a ceremony that is meant to publicly acknowledge one's grief, right? And put it at the center rather than on the fringe.
Yeah, I love that scene. It almost like that's when everybody broke, is in a way of being like, oh, we can talk about this. We can talk about her mom. We can talk about the wife that my sister, it was like a pivotal point in the book of that conversation.
Yeah, and I think we do live in fear. Anytime I've been so worried about someone finding out about my grief or sadness, it's almost always a useless worry. It's like acknowledging it is the cathartic part. Connecting with someone over it is the cathartic part. We're missing out on those kind of beautiful moments, I think, because of fear, and it's hard to move past fear, but I think Phoebe put herself in a position where it's easy to move past her fear because she just doesn't know anyone.
Yeah. I love the scene between Phoebe and Layla when Layla enters the room while Phoebe's in the bath, and Phoebe stands up to Layla, but Layla also stuns Phoebe a little bit by telling her she was concerned when Phoebe didn't answer the door. But yet they both lack a lot of self-awareness in this moment. Can you talk about that scene a little bit?
Yeah. So, this was a moment, of really thinking about Lila's transformation and how we could all start seeing her differently. Phoebe is trying to enjoy a moment alone in the bath, and like someone just waltzing in is so obviously rude and inappropriate and seems to represent exactly what it is that makes Layla frustrating and self-centered. And so that's why she explodes. But when I was thinking about it from Lila's point of view, it was like, okay, well, if there is someone you're worried about who was suicidal a few days ago, right? And they're not answering the door, right? Yeah, you would feel like maybe I should just barge in or just go in and always kind of make yourself present and be in the room. And then I started to think about Lila's incessant chattering, not as, I was like, what if that's not like her being just obsessed with herself? What if this is just her way of distracting Phoebe? What if this is just something she's doing to kind of keep Phoebe out of her head and in the world, right? And I never, came down on like when she was doing that and when she wasn't. I think that the fun of Lila for me was kind of always leaving that up for interpretation, never quite knowing, but leaving open the possibility for like, oh, this whole way that Lila has been like to be a distraction, right? And to just sort of be in her face and never to leave her alone. And I thought that was kind of heroic, as heroic as Lila can be. That was an act of heroism.
I never thought about it like that. And this is like opening a whole different aspect of the novel to me. And I love it. That's a fantastic way. Like what a heroic moment for her. That is,
yeah, because sometimes,
really cool.
when I've been really grieved, I remember, after my brother died, sitting at middle school lunch tables, because I was in middle school, and just listening sort of in awe at the little things that were of such great concern at a middle school lunch table, like the eighth grade dance or what, so-and-so said in home ec class or whatever, we still had home ec. And I remember wanting so badly to care about those things because I used to, I had felt like a normal middle schooler, like a few months ago, but now I was in this new and darker place and I couldn't care about them. And so I kept thinking about that with Lila, like almost like this middle school girl, like chattering on about her life. And it's like Phoebe wants to be there in that same space where the little things are big and you don't have to be always thinking about the huge existential like life things over here, right? So yeah, that's kind of where that all came from.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Everyone in the book is hiding something for sure, either from themselves or from someone else, and it's quite damaging to them. Can you speak to those choices of the characters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some characters don't even know they're hiding something. Especially Lila, I think. But Gary and Jim, and you know, a lot of the side characters. I think that's certainly true of. They're very focused on like what they think they should want or what they want to want, what they want things to be like, and acting in such a way to make those things happen. And so much of Phoebe's presence in the book is about dismantling that and maybe, you know, having the conversations that only Phoebe can have with these people because she's the stranger. She's the only one they can be honest with, right? They're not going to start talking about their marital disappointments with anyone else, right? I mean, Marla, Jim, Gary's sister, right, can confess what's going on in her marriage to Phoebe, but she's not going to do it with her future sister-in-law, right? The stakes are too high. So by unloading some of these things or saying some of these things out loud for the first time, though, that can be really transformative, right? Just admitting something or posing a new question that you've been afraid to ask yourself, right? That's I wanted each character to kind of have a chance to have a moment like that. And of course, you know, for Layla, that's huge, right? I mean, Layla has that big scene on her bachelorette party night where she's really starting to voice some things that are terrifying to her. Like not like I don't want Gary, but sort of I don't even know what I want is the thing that she's been afraid to admit. And that, of course, is transformative for her.
One of the most fascinating characters in the book for me was Patricia. I felt like she, you know, was described as being this sort of drunk, horrible person. And it turns out, at least in her interactions with Phoebe, she sprinkles these like nuggets of wisdom throughout the conversation. One of them was the exchange where Patricia says to her, "All we want is permission to stand there naked and be our damned selves." And that really stuck with me. And I was kind of thinking about wondering, why is it so hard for these characters to be themselves? Everyone is kind of struggling with that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably different for each character, you know. I mean, you know, for a side character like Jim, you know, I mean, he's struggling with the grief of losing his sister, right? So, you know, that's like sort of blocking him and keeping him from being himself. Gary is sort of burdened by concerns about what he should do as a good father or as a good potential partner. You know, I mean, he's always thinking of that before he's thinking of, well, how can I just be myself? You know, so I mean, I'm not going to go through every character, but I think there are different things for each character, and I think for Phoebe, you know, I think maybe it's I don't know, shame that, you know, that she always had this idea that, you know, she was going to be saved by marriage or saved by this new family that she was going to create. Like, and I think at the root of that wish is this fantasy that, oh, they're going to transform me into someone who's not me. Like this process of getting married or this process of becoming a mother, it's going to make me into a better version of myself, and I won't have to continue being me, right? I think that's the root of the fantasy. And so when Patricia says that, I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to get at, and a realization that I've had in my life, which is, oh, I don't actually want someone to save me from myself. I want to feel better about being myself and know how to just be myself. And then if you do that, no one needs to save you. I mean, you're just happy being yourself. You're happy in your life. You're happy doing what it is you're doing, right? And actually, that was a realization that came through writing this book and kind of giving Patricia the character that I gave her, which I wrote early on when I was writing her character. I think she says something, I describe her as like, it's like talking to someone who's writing their posthumous autobiography aloud. And I was like, oh, now she can say anything. She can just be wise and say, ridiculous philosophical things while drinking at 2 p.m. Yeah.
She really does have a lot of insight. Another one of the lines that really stuck out was Patricia talking to Phoebe about aging, that it's saying goodbye to whoever you thought you were, wherever you thought you would be. And that actually applies to like a lot of the transformations the characters in this book go through. Um, and I guess I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, how these characters sort of let go of who they see themselves as in order to move forward with their lives.
hmm Yeah, I didn't think that. I've always looked forward to getting older. I mean, even when I was a kid, like becoming a teenager was so amazing. Or, when I was a teenager, I couldn't wait to be 20. When I was in my 20s, I thought like, oh, when I'm 28, like, I think that's going to be awesome. And I actually think that continues to exist for me. But so I always had this optimism about aging and optimism about like, I had this idea that, um, there's going to be progress made, right? And things are going to get better and happier as you go along. And I think in some ways that's true. That's been true. Like getting older and having more perspective and experience, it does open up new forms of happiness. Uh, I was a little blindsided by how much grieving was part of that. And not even anything in particular. Like I'm not talking like life events or terrible things that happen, but really just the grief of getting older, meaning I have to say goodbye to some version of myself that's no longer working for me, or a version of myself that I just don't want to be anymore. Or a version of myself that I do want to be, desperately want to be, but I know I can't be anymore. And I think that's just part of life, and I think that's just going to continue to be a part of life. We go through these phases where we're working towards being a certain way, and then we make it, and then we get to be that way, maybe for a couple of years, maybe longer, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. And then at some point things change for whatever reason, and there's a new shift has to be made, right? And that can feel a little exhausting, and I think that can feel like grief. We built this wonderful life, we built this wonderful self, we figured certain things out, and now we have new questions and new complications and new decisions to make. I mean, that can be exhausting. But I think once we get through that exhausting part, and if we grieve it, then we can move on and enjoy the next version of ourselves, right? And so on and so on.
I love that. Well, we're coming to the end of our questions. We just have a couple more for you. Um, what I thought was so wonderful about the way the book ended is that it was hopeful without being tied up in a bow. Can you talk about how you got there with the ending?
Yeah, I really didn't know how the book was going to end for a long time. Whether the wedding was going to happen or not, how whether Gary and Phoebe were going to end up together. And at some point, I realized that actually the most important thing, like all the other things, of course, matter, but the most important thing, and the ending will be incomplete if I don't know that Phoebe is going to be okay. And if I don't know that she has come to this place where she feels capable of handling life. And so that was really the focus for me, and making that clear and ending on this act of her moving forward, walking out of the hotel, like that is the happy ending. And some people, and even I think in this chat and other interviews I've done, like they're like, "Are Phoebe and Gary together?" And I think absolutely yes in some ways, but also I don't know. I mean, I really just wanted to leave her in this place where I trusted her. Like I trusted her to do what needed to be done, and I trusted her that she was going to go forward and make the life she wants to happen. And possibly that includes Gary, possibly not. But if it didn't, I knew it was going to be okay too. Yeah.
Okay, so finally, this is a question Alison and I love to ask everyone we talk to, every author we talk to. And it's just, what do you want people to take away from this book after having read it?
I hope it encourages people to be more honest in their lives, if that's something that they're struggling with or something that they worry a lot about. A lot of these characters become very honest over the course of this book. And I really tried as much as I could to reward them for that honesty. And that's exactly because I do think honesty can function that way in our lives. And we live in so much fear of it and its potential consequences that we avoid it and deny it and do whatever we can to kind of dance around the truth or just hide things or omit things. So yeah, I would really love it if someone put down this book and just said exactly what it was they wanted for dinner, even if everyone else in the family hates zucchini or pizza. I mean, no one hates pizza, but you know what I mean. Even being honest about the small things and those small moments, I find can actually be quite important. Like saying, no, not whatever you guys wanted to eat, but I actually really want pizza tonight, and that small moment of honesty is practice for those bigger moments of honesty. So just, put down the book and make all kinds of confessions. That's what I ask for.
I love that so much. Alison, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a fun conversation. We're so glad we got to have this time with you. Thank you to everyone who attended. A reminder that if you haven't already, you can pick up a copy of The Wedding People at your local Barnes & Noble or at barnesandnoble.com. And to please join us on October 1st for a conversation with our September book club author, Danzy Senna. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again, Alison.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came. I've been seeing your little notes in the chat. So I really appreciate all the support and love. Thank you for reading. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.